and policies of the government. With changes breaking new ground, in the present scenario, there is no scope for perpetuation of the status quo or a half-hearted amalgamation of any astounding innovation with the conventional past. A radically new technical and environmental framework has to be visualized not only for today, but for 50 years hence. The pertinent issues calling for deliberation and innovation in planning and design of hospital buildings must thus be addressed. There is a need for faster, more efficient forms of construction to keep up with the healthcare modernization process, for which modular construction could emerge as an apt solution. The use of modular construction is directly influenced by the client's requirements for speed of construction in case of a new project and addition and alterations to existing departments with least disturbance to the functioning of facilities in case of upgradation. Hospitals are facilities that are heavily serviced and are built to last, constantly adapting to changing needs. Developments over the past decade are shaping the morphology and spatial organizations of the modern hospital. The apparent trend towards creation of interior streets, atria, and distribution of services along a major spine that brings in daylight also are tending to redefine hospitals as horizontal organizations, and note has to be taken of this. Further, hospital planning has to contend with the concurrent phenomena of epidemiological transition and advances in technology. The decade has seen the disease profile and causes of mortality shifting from communicable diseases to non-communicable lifestyle diseases, accidents and injuries, rendering many hospital services less relevant. Advances in technology have led to practices such as computerized patient information and physician order entry, handheld computers and portable diagnostic equipment, wireless workstations, image-guided surgeries by simulation, and sensor-monitored healing. Technologies for treatment and monitoring could result in decrease in the need for admission in hospitals, reduced hospital stay, and carrying out of many diagnostic and surgical procedures outside hospitals. This may render the present patterns of central laboratories, intensive care units, operation theaters, ward units, and all connected services rather obsolete, thus again establishing the need for an entirely new approach to design. Located anywhere, a hospital by virtue of its function will be a significant consumer of energy and major environmental concern. Hospital buildings and services have to be designed to address these twin issues in no uncertain terms. Energy efficiency and sustainable practices should be the gospel for future hospitals. The increasing need for maintaining asepsis in a hospital will necessitate due care in planning, designing, and detailing in terms of right location, right material, and specifications. A safe, healthy, healing, and humane environment for the patient will see enhancement in the patient space requirement, and this will emerge as a primary planning and design consideration. The need for waste management would also become a major consideration. There would be an essential need to work out low or no maintenance architectural structures. The hospital utilities not only support all the building systems and medical equipments used to care for patients, but also play an important role in the hospital life support, infection control, environmental support, and communication systems. Hospital utilities need to be reliable, efficient, cost-effective, and are required to meet the standards of quality. Properly designed layouts, utilities, and maintenance of equipment and services in a hospital can reduce hospital-acquired infection considerably, facilitate safer care, and serve as tools for healing. There is a need to build systems for delivery of utilities that meet the required standards for quality and are reliable, efficient, and cost-effective. There is also a need to provide for failures and breakdowns with backup arrangements so as to maintain continuous services at all times and be prepared for any emergencies. Incorporation of building management system, therefore, to ensure optimum utilization of resources with assured levels of comfort and response becomes inevitable. Above all, with hospitals in India getting crowded by the time they are built, there is a need for long-term planning as well as design management to cater for such large strength. As you are aware, that upgradation of medical care and related aspects of new multi-speciality hospitals, both in public as well as in the private domain, have become a national priority. Armed forces have also embarked on the journey for modernization of large number of military hospitals. I sincerely hope that the professionals attending this conference will deliberate upon the impact of the cited emerging trends and issues in planning and management of future hospitals and hospital infrastructure, and come up with tangible solutions that are functionally feasible, economically viable, and environmentally sensible. I am certain that with so many brilliant heads coming together, imagination and innovation could run riot, firmly entrenching the cause for modern hospitals as enduring symbols of health, wellness, safety, and sustainability. Finally, do remember, a medical professional's competency and patient care vision would heavily depend on quality of infrastructure services provided. I wish the seminar all the success. Thank you.
Yeah, I request General Badani to take a seat on dais, please. Thank you, sir. Now I request our first chairperson for the session, Lieutenant General N.K. Parmar, PVSM, AVSM, VRC, VSM, former Director General Armed Forces Medical Services, to kindly present a memento to Lieutenant General Badani as a token of respect from Organizing Committee HIMT 2011. Thank you, sir. Lieutenant General N.K. Parmar has held several key appointments. He has been the head, Department of Hospital Administration, AFMC, and then Commandant, Command Hospital, Kolkata in 2005 and 6. Deputy Director, Medical Services of Eastern Command in 2006-7, Director General Medical Services Army in 2008-9. He has developed the scales of air conditioning for Armed Forces Hospital and has authored the first handbook on management of military hospital. He was awarded by His Excellency President of India Param Vishesh Seva Medal in 2010, Ati Vishesh Seva Medal in 2007, Veer Chakra in 1971, and Vishesh Seva Medal in 2005. I also invite on the dais our second chairperson for the session, Dr. M. Rahman, Chairman of Jammu and Kashmir Finance Commission. He has an illustrious career in Indian Administrative Services. He is also the chairman of Study Group on Muslim Backwardness, Government of Maharashtra, in the status of Minister of State. He is 1966 Indian Administrative Services Cadre Officer. He was the former Secretary to Government of India, Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs, and former Vice Chancellor of Aligarh Muslim University. He was conferred D.Litt. by Banaras Hindu University for outstanding administrative skills and invaluable contribution towards the cause of education. He received Padma Shri in 1991, besides being conferred with various decorations and awards for rendering public service of an exceptionally high order in Jammu and Kashmir, particularly after the outbreak of insurgency. Thank you, sir, for gracing the dais. I now request our chairpersons for the day to kindly introduce the speakers.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it's my privilege to be sitting with my old colleague and friend, Jan Badani, and I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and also my co-chairperson, Dr. Rahman. During this session, we are going to have few presentations, 4 of them, in a varied subject. That is, the one is the new healthcare paradigm, the nanotechnology in healthcare, relocatable hospitals, challenges and opportunities for healthcare innovation in India. So it's a wide spectrum being covered. I would like to invite the first speaker, and the first speaker is Mr. A. Vidhish. He is the Managing Director of Johnson & Johnson Medical India. And Mr. Vidhish is the Managing Director of Johnson & Johnson. He has more than 30 years of experience in broad functional and business experiences in FMCG, medical devices, diagnostic institutes. And he holds a master's degree in management studies. May I request him to please come for the presentation. And to remind that he is an honorary fellow of Association of Minimal Access Surgeons of India. May I request Mr. Vidhish to give his presentation. Timing allotted.
Good morning, distinguished and accomplished officers on the dais and the respected audience. I know very well there's a huge amount of interest the past couple of years in the area of healthcare, and I have had an opportunity to be part of the various forums. And very interesting development is that since 2000, the whole healthcare industry itself, which was never used to be considered in the healthcare industry, now has got the term healthcare industry, because of the multiple changes that has taken place in this particular space. What has been the healthcare burden, what we used to see as the healthcare burden for the last so many years, is going through a transformation, dramatic transformation, and which is enabled with the technology and the recent advances. And with the economic growth galloping at a great speed, obviously there is a big impact on the healthcare. What I propose to do is that, I won't take much of a time, but what I thought is to give you a sense of what I call it as the E3 is basically nothing but what to expect, what to explore, and what to experience in the healthcare industry. I've tried to put together some of the paradigm shift that's happening in the area of healthcare, and particularly which is likely to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. So I'll touch upon some of the brief concepts, and hopefully that will stimulate the thoughts of people who are interested in the area of healthcare in this country. There's quite a lot of being talked about Indians. We owe a lot to the Indians. we taught us how to count, without which no worthwhile scientific discovery could have been made. But it's true, because India is a cradle of human race, birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of tradition. So first we need to remember is India's current growth is unprecedented in its history. As far as GDP is concerned, we have never had this level of growth. So obviously that presents itself a significant impact on every aspect of our life, particularly in the area of healthcare. And obviously India's GDP is a longer-term prospects. We believe that it's going to be the second largest by 2050. And this is going to be driven by education and services, and particularly apart from education, it's also going to be driven by healthcare. And obviously this will lead you to inverted pyramids. As you can see from the chart, it's normally called the deprived population was an aspiring population or a seekers to global. Now you're going to see a large burgeoning population that's happening in the middle class, as there is going to be huge aspiration of consumption of healthcare by this particular bulge that is moving up very significantly, and the share of wallet shifts from necessities to discretionary items. And healthcare happens to be one of the discretionary. Not necessarily. People earlier used to deal only with the breakdown health. People are going to be looking at preventive health. Now, how do the patients of the future look like? So you're going to see 4 trends. One is the age quack, as we call it, as like earthquake. We are seeing a huge difference in the population of this country, as what they call it as the demographic dividends. And you're going to see a big change in the younger population being the dominant player of the future. The wealth and sophistication and information overload and disease areas like cancer, heart disease, and stroke, which never used to be the main disease profile in the past, that's going to be the main disease profile, which I'm not sure whether as a healthcare system we are ready to deal with. And in urban areas will be one of the most pressing issues, and as compared to all other countries, just giving you some data, I won't get into the detail. As you can see from here, all the other emerging countries are going to face the issue of urbanization. But this is very interesting, which you have to look at. The information flows to patient will be less linear and less predictive. Earlier days, the information used to be very, very linear and predictive, where the patient used to go to a doctor, and the doctor used to get information either from a government or from medical companies. And today, it's going to be very different. Patients are actually coming in with information overload, which is happening through various social sites, internet, availability of information, and obviously, the current or the future patients are going to be different from the way in which we are going to deal with for tomorrow. Some of the statistics that I've given here, 83% of the consumers with internet access use for healthcare information. Today, internet, there is a huge search that's happening in the area of healthcare, and 24% doctors also review the internet. And very important thing is that 40 million links for breast cancer alone. So there are people on a daily basis are searching the net. So the way in which people are going to seek information is going to be very different. Same thing is going to happen in the area of payers. Now, we never used to have the concept of payers in the past. Now, we are going to have the payers coming in a big way, whether it's an insurance for the masses or the funding system. In fact, yesterday I was having a chat with in the ministry, and the whole issue about whether it's a RSBY is the way to go, or is it going to be a public-private partnership. There's a lot of discussion that's happening, but it's evolving, and it'll evolve into a completely different model than what we are used to. And bottom line, on cost control, acceleration is going to be a very big. Now, if you look at insurance government from government-private sources will dramatically increase. We are today, it's about 10%, it's likely to go up to 40%, and government to cover 400 million patients. It's a huge task the government has taken, which is unprecedented in the past. So there are various trends that are happening on a global basis where people have to start sharing their outcome data, which we never used to do that. That's going to put a lot of pressure on the way in the healthcare providers are going to deal with payers. People are going to insist on outcome being published on the net. Like, as an example, I mentioned your Minnesota health scores. Now, they already started saying, now based on that, people are going to do an accreditation. It's a very challenging task, but it's already, there's a big move towards outcome-based payers are going to reimburse, which is a very, very different ball game that we never used to deal with. Now, if you really look at the payers, are also now pushing for healthcare spend. If you really look at the way in which in 2005, 5% was in diagnosis, and 85% in monitoring, and 10% in the area of monitoring. And so now if you look at the way in which it's going to change, it's all going to be predictive. Now there's going to be a huge amount of technology that's being working, companies are working, including ours, many of us are working on predictive technology, rather than dealing with technology of breakdown health. So you're going to see a big shift that's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. Now, even the stakeholders today, if you look at attempt to introduce efficiencies, more standardized treatment pathways. Today, our patient treatment pathways are quite impaired. Today, if somebody is suffering from a heart disease, or first gatekeeper is the general physician. Now, there are various ways in which the patient is being referred. Ultimately, the patient, by the time he gets treated, there's a hell of a lot of time and there's inefficiency in the treatment patient pathway. That's going to dramatically change the way in which, as you can see from the chart, I won't get into the details of how the treatment patient pathway is going to improve, where right from the time when somebody has a symptom and the number of time that it takes for that symptom to be identified and proper treatment pathway is provided. So possible clinical pathways are going to be, there's going to be a standardized protocol. Today we don't have a standardized protocol in the optimum care, reduced over or misuse of drugs, predictable outcomes. There's going to be a significant effort toward the predictable outcomes and sustainability of the healthcare delivery itself. That will happen through independent of specialists and continuous improvement. Not necessarily you need to have a specialist. I won't get into the details of some of the technology that's happening, whether they want to break up a job if you do a cardiovascular surgery, and not necessarily a cardiovascular surgeon has to do a complete bypass procedure. That might get broken up into subcomponents of jobs, and these jobs are likely to get outsourced. Somebody will do only one piece of the entire job. So procedure itself will be converted into a job. There are a lot of examples to that. It's already happening. One other way the predictability of health is going to happen through universal health record. There's a huge amount of work that's going on in the area of portability of health information and universal health record or predictably health state. One other thing that we need to be looking at now, start exploring, as I mentioned to you, growing economy, increased urbanization, a lot of stuff that's happening. So you're going to see internet usage, mobile usage, and wireless subscriber. This is going to alters significantly. We had a chance to talk to some of the IT companies. The amount of innovation and technology that's happening, usage of mobile phones and internet and storefronts, that's again going to alter the state. Like what you saw about 5 years back, we used to stand in the queue for landline. Today, even a common man can have a mobile phone. About 400, 500 million subscribers. They're going to be a potential method of providing healthcare. There's a lot of work that's happening in this area of. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening in the accreditation, RSBY, National Rural Health Mission, and all these have not been there about 4 or 5 years back. Suddenly these are all emerging. But this will take a completely different avatar of using the technology, particularly the telephonies, wireless, and the whole convergence of technology on one single platform, like what Apple iPhone, which we saw, it's already, there's a lot of work that's happening in the area of health being converging on a simple PDS. Now, I don't want to get into the details of penetration. As you can see from here, the significant change in disease profile is what is going to make our entire healthcare paradigm is going to be very different. As you can see from here, coronary heart disease is believed, or it's been estimated, 55% of the worldwide cardiac deaths are going to happen in India. which is pretty scary. But I'm not sure that whether we are well prepared. But however, the private entrepreneurs industry is very actively working on how to deal with this disease burden. As I mentioned here, some of the data, whether it's diabetes, and which recently there are 3 districts on diabetes, there is an estimate. There's scary information. Though we thought that we are number 2 to China, now I believe we are again going to be number 1 in diabetes. They're expecting to more than 90 million. So this is going to be another significant change in the disease profile, where as a public system and a private system, we are not geared for it. Our unawareness is so high in the area of diabetes. So we are going to see a big paradigm that's going to happen. So disruptive innovation is the way to go. Now, I'm just giving you some example of what we called some time back, way back when you looked at yesterday, Japan disrupted economy. If you look at Kodak or Ford, Merrill Lynch, AT&T, these are the companies of yesteryears. What happened in today? Today is Toyota, Walmart, Intel, Southwest, Bloomberg, Best Buy, and China. They are the countries or the companies which are disrupting innovation. But what do you think is going to be tomorrow? Tomorrow not going to be the same countries or the same companies. Tomorrow is going to be Embracer, Veritas. You're going to see RIM Blackberries, eBays, and of course, tomorrow is also going to be India. You're going to see a big disruption, innovation that's going to happen in all this. Already we started showing signs of innovation. I'm just giving you some example from Professor Charles Fine. Evolution in the natural world. Fruit flies evolve faster than mammals faster than reptiles. The key tool is cross-species benchmarking. And that's exactly the industries are doing. Is there anything that we can learn from the fruit fly, which actually replicate the human genome, and they die very faster, live for a short while. There's a lot of benchmarking that's happening on how do we look at the life and death of a fruit fly, because then you can do a huge amount of research. And same thing is happening in industry, where from infotainment to microchips, autos, and all of them are different evolution. Why do you need to wait for the evolution to happen? Instead, there is a reason for us to learn from different evolution with a different genome. Now, the industries that will see disruption is healthcare. Definitely in the next 5 years, as I mentioned to you, though I didn't have much of a chance, rather time is too short for me to share some of the big disruptions that are happening. Already we are working on some of the disruption, which is going to change the way in which healthcare is going to be delivered. Just to end, I just thought, let me leave some humorous thoughts for you to remember how the paradigms are created. And sometimes, without our realization, we tend to deal with certain paradigms without knowing why the paradigm was created. I'm quite sure that in India, we will break those paradigms. How a paradigm is created. A group of scientists placed 5 monkeys in a cage, and in the middle a ladder with the bananas on the top. Every time a monkey went up the ladder, the scientists soaked the rest of the monkeys with cold water. After a while, every time a monkey went up the ladder, the others beat up the one on the ladder. After some time, no monkey dared to go up the ladder, regardless of the temptation. Scientists then decided to substitute one of the monkeys. The first thing the new monkey did was to go up the ladder. Immediately, the other monkeys beat him up. After several beatings, the new member learned not to climb the ladder, even though never knew why. Second monkey was substituted, same occurred, and same thing happened to the fourth was substituted, fifth monkey was replaced. What was left was a group of 5 monkeys that, even though never received a cold shower, continued to beat up any monkey who attempted to climb the ladder. If it was possible to ask the monkeys why they would beat up all those who attempted to go up the ladder, I bet the answer would be, I don't know, that's how the things are done around here. Does it sound familiar? So don't miss the opportunity to challenge why we continue to do what we are doing if there is a different way out there. Tomorrow is going to be a different way in India. The only 2 things are infinite, universe and the human stupidity. And I'm not so sure about the former by Albert Einstein. Thank you, Jai Hind.
Please take your seat. I think you'll appreciate the very lucid presentation the speaker has made, and he has done the crystal ball gazing for us for what paradigm holds for us in the healthcare scenario. All the questions which you wish to ask to the speaker can be taken note of. At the end of the whole session, you can ask your questions to the speaker which you desire. He is a resident administrator in the Department of Hospital Administration of AIIMS. He is a graduate of the Armed Forces Medical College, Pune, and is in the Army Medical Corps for the last 16 years. And he has already acquired the postgraduate diploma in hospital and health management from BIMS. And he has also expertise in computer. He has acquired advanced computing and web designing from CDAC. And he has had a stint in the foreign mission. May I request Colonel Garg to please come and give his presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, sir, for those kind words. At the outset, I would like to thank all my mentors, my gurus, who are here in the audience, with General Parmar, sir, Shakti Gupta, sir, to give me a chance to deliver this talk. What I am going to speak today is on nanotechnology and nanomedicine. Let's go into a small imagination. What if doctors can search out and destroy the very first cancer cells that would otherwise have caused a tumor to develop in the body? What if a broken part of a cell could be removed and replaced with a miniaturized biological machine? Or pumps of the sizes of molecules could be implanted to deliver life-saving medicines precisely where they are needed? Well, today, these scenarios may sound unbelievable, but they are the long-term goals of nanomedicine, and it is anticipated that medical benefits will come as early as 10 years from now. Disease and ill health are largely caused by damage at the molecular and cellular level. And in general terms, we say the science of practice of diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of disease is medicine. Nanomedicine is the monitoring, repairing, construction, and control of human biological systems at the cellular level by using materials and structures engineered at the atomic or molecular level. Nanotechnology, well, it is the creation of functional materials, devices, and systems through the understanding and control of matter at dimensions in the scale of 1 to 100 nanometers. As per Professor Taniguchi, nanotechnology mainly consists of the processing of separation, consolidation, and deformation of materials by one atom or by one molecule. Technology based on the manipulation of individual atoms and molecules to build structures to complex atomic specifications is what nanotechnology is as per Drexler. Well, how big or how small are we talking about? Let's think of a football, a diameter of about 22 centimeters. The Earth as a globe is about 10 million times bigger. And when we talk about nanomedicine or nanotechnology, the fullerenes are about 1 billion times smaller than that. What is a nanometer? We all know it's 1 billionth of a meter, roughly 10 times the size of an individual atom. About 2000 years ago, sulfide nanocrystals were used by Greeks and Romans to dye their hair. In the Middle Ages, gold nanoparticles of different sizes were used to produce different colors in glass-stained windows. In the modern era, the concept of nanotechnology was first given by Richard Feynman in 1959 in his lecture, "There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom," where he said, "The principles of physics do not speak against the possibility of maneuvering things atom by atom, that is, manipulating material at a scale of individual atoms and molecules." How does nanotechnology work? Atoms are the basic building blocks for all matter in our universe, and they are held together by their complementary shapes that lock together or the charges that are present on it. Every atom has different property at various conditions. The goal of nanotechnology is to manipulate individual atoms and place them in a pattern to produce a desired structure. This leads to nanoscale size effect. Now, what is this effect? Realization of miniature devices and systems while we provide more functionality to them. We attain high surface area to volume ratio, and this leads to manifestation of novel phenomena and change in physical properties. Physical properties such as melting point, reactivity, conductivity, strength, light emission, these are changed at the atomic and molecular level and are exploited by the nanomedicine concept to achieve target specificity, small size, encapsulation, carrying highly concentrated drug, surface charge zeta potentials, and efficient drug release. How do we make something of a nanoscale size? There are two approaches. A top-down approach, that is, we break down big things into small, or a bottom-up approach, that is, single atoms and molecules, they are structured to larger nanoparticles. And these manipulations, they are done using an atomic force microscope, a scanning tunnel microscope, a virtual surface profiling microscope, and other complex machines. Now, the European Science Foundation, it defines nanomedicine very specifically and says, the science and technology of diagnosing, treating, and preventing disease and traumatic injury, of relieving pain, and of preserving and improving human health using molecular tools and molecular knowledge of the human body. Nanomedicine embraces 5 main subdisciplines: analytical tools, nanoimaging, nanomaterials and nanodevices, therapeutics, drug delivery systems, clinical, regulatory, and toxicological issues. Now, I'll take you into some of the possibilities of the future. What are the applications of nanotechnology in medicine? Diagnostic as well as therapeutic applications. Therapeutic applications like delivering medication to exact location, killing of bacteria and cancer cells, repair of damaged tissues, oxygen transport, skin and dental care, augmentation of immune system, atherosclerosis treatment, clotocyte concept, and brain enhancement. Improved imaging could be using nanoprobes, which attach themselves to the body particles and emit a magnetic field. Nanotracking could be used to detect tumors, which are very, very few cells in size in their initial stages. Nanorobots, a concept theoretically envisaged by the nanotechnology and nanomedicine. Nanodevices with a size of about 0.5 to 3 microns. They are powered by metabolizing local glucose and oxygen. They may have simple onboard computers, which may be capable of performing computations with a navigational network. They could be able to distinguish different kind of cell types by checking the surface antigens. They can be retrievable. They may be capable of generating radiation, and they can enter the cancerous cells to destroy them by acoustic signals. Targeted delivery to tumors using organic dendrimers and hollow polymer capsules. Theoretically, nanotechnological allows mimicking natural biological processes like repair of damaged tissues, use of scaffoldings in the broken bones to facilitate faster healing, transport of oxygen, and creation of an artificial red blood cell. In skin, to remove the right amount of dead skin, remove excess and add missing oils, right amount of moisturizing compounds, and then deep pore cleaning concepts. A few examples of therapeutic applications of nanomedicine. A mouthwash full of smart nanomachines could identify and destroy pathogenic bacteria while allowing the harmless flora in the mouth to flourish in a healthy ecosystem. Or medical nano devices augmenting the immune system by finding and disabling unwanted bacteria and viruses. Or in emergency management, a clotocyte concept in which clot-inducing medical nanorobots with fully deployed embedding capabilities. Devices working in the bloodstream, nibbling away the atherosclerotic deposits. This would help in prevention of heart attacks. Then a microscopic machine going through the bloodstream, injecting or picking up samples for analysis. Or a nanorobot reaching the alveolar surface, attaching to the tissue, and then exploding inside to destroy the cancer cells. Or a respirocyte, a nano device which could deliver almost 8 times the capability of oxygen inside the tissues. DNA repair, a nanorobo grabbing sick T lymphocytes. Or in the brain damage, nanorobots developing artificial network in the brain and enhancing the brain. Now, this kind of nanotechnology research requires a totally different breed of laboratories and clean rooms. A clean room area is required, an animal laboratory is required for research purpose, utility systems are required, and of course, the rest of building architecture. The complex mix of technical requirements is aimed at creating an interior environment that is extremely controlled to a degree far exceeding than other research facilities. The main considerations, they are controlling of temperature and humidity levels, isolating vibration and acoustic noise, reducing the quantity and size of airborne particles, shielding from electrical, electromagnetic, and radio frequency interferences. A clean room, it's an environment with controlled pollutants such as dust, airborne microbes, aerosol particles, and chemical vapors. It has controlled level of contamination. It has got controlled level of temperature and humidity control. The temperature and humidity control may be to fractions of a degree centigrade, something like 0.01 degrees Celsius or 0.25 degrees Celsius, depending upon the requirements. Relative humidity may be required to be controlled at about 1% levels. Vibration isolation. The slightest vibration can invalidate results when we talk in terms of nanoscale. So even small motions can be damaging. So the buildings, they need to be isolated from the rest of the areas where the vibration is anticipated. Could be